Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session from Synnex on Microsoft 365 Business. Just to let you know as we start that the session is being recorded, and probably just one other quick housekeeping element is if you want to use the chat window to ask questions, we've made sure that there's time at the end so that we can go through and put those in the right order and cover them for you. So let's jump in. And we'll start talking about some of the enhancements that have been made to Microsoft 365 Business, not just in terms of the product, but in terms of some of the supporting material and scenarios that you can also start working with Microsoft 365 Business. So my name's Mark O'Shea. I'm a Microsoft MVP for Windows for Devices and IT. Microsoft 365 is a product I've had exposure to for basically from just before it was launched through to now. So I work very closely with members of the product team. So we've got a lot of good information we can share, and also I'll use that as a tactic to encourage you to register for the sessions that we'll have in October, because there'll be a few new things we can share from that time frame as well. So just in terms of the top line agenda, we'll talk about some of the SMB trends before we move into just an overview of what Microsoft 365 Business provides. Then we'll talk about why this is good for partners, why it's important for partners to have an understanding of what Microsoft 365 Business is and how it fits in against some of the other Office 365 and Microsoft 365 offerings. Recently, there have been a few different programs, both from Microsoft and Synnex, that are designed to help drive Microsoft 365 Business traction. So we'll talk about some of those, and then we'll talk about some of the details around registering for the upcoming events. And we've got members, other team members from Synnex will be chatting sitting in the chat window with you. So if it's anything that they'll be able to address that's Synnex specific, they'll certainly be able to address that for you over in the conversation window. So I'll be, for most situations as we go through today, I'll be mostly ignoring the chat window. Otherwise it gets a bit too chaotic for me. And instead I'll just focus on the presentation, and then we'll come back to the chat window. And as I'm going through the Q&A, if there was something that you asked pretty early that you think I've missed, just paste it in again so that it grabs my attention. So when we take a look at what's going on inside of a lot of small business customers today, one of the things that's fairly consistent for those who've had a bit of a piecemeal approach is that they make buying decisions based on what they need at that point in time. So generally, there's not some kind of longer term strategy. You've probably picked up some of these customers over the years who've effectively just gone out, purchased what they thought was right, and then it was your job at some point in time to go through and try to start piecing some of these different elements together. And what ends up happening is it's not just that they have different versions of the same tool. So it's not just like they've got Office 2016 alongside Office 2013 and Office 2010. I really hope they're not going too far back from that. But what we also see though is that when it comes to things like antivirus software, for example, we generally find that there's that they'll have effectively what may have been pre-installed on the PC. If we're lucky, they've continued the subscription, but other times they just may be a mix and match. And what it means is that for the customer, it's hard enough for them to go through and try to manage that, yet alone for you as the partner to step in and try to rein in control of that when you've got all of these different things that don't really work together the way that they should. Now, other things that we know are going on in those environments, there may be some older versions of Windows Server, there might be some SBS instances out in play, there might be different versions of Windows on the desktop. So one of the ideas behind when we're working with Microsoft 365 Business is trying to get some degree of consolidation in terms of what they're actually using. Now, one of the challenges that we've got when we do have this different fragmentation inside the organization is, people are using different tools for the same purpose. The ability for them to collaborate may not be as strong as it would be if they were using similar versions and be able to learn from other team members. We might find that some versions of the applications that they use don't really work very well in a disconnected state versus more modern versions of those applications. And the other element that we find as well is that because of just the sheer variety of what they're running internally, is that while some things may be well configured, there may be other things that are, might be a bit older that don't have the same security capabilities. There may be things that aren't getting the appropriate patches, etc., which means that they end up being, one of those, one of the, the many number of people who are targeted for cyber attacks. And some of the things that we've seen over the last few years is that the realization today is that people know now that cyber attacks that are taking place today, especially those that are based on some kind of ransomware scenario, don't really care how big or small an organization you are. They don't care about what kind of data you're keeping. They're not doing it as industrial espionage to figure out, can they get secrets about your organization? Effectively, it's about, is there a way that we can extract money out of these organizations? So trying to get to a more consistent experience across the users and the devices in the organization is definitely something that really starts to pay off. Now, this has got a downside for you as partners as well, because it means that you've got to be out there supporting many different versions of Windows, many different versions of Office, and this is one of those things where you've probably all got at least one or two of those customers that really struggle to keep up, and that every time they're going to lodge a support call with you, that it's going to be a lot of work, because you've basically got to try to get reacquainted with the technologies that they're using. So what we try to do here is say, well, how can we start trying to, make it easier to make some decisions? How can we, simplify some of the licensing situation? How can we get standardization in place? And this is really one of the key capabilities that we're aiming for with Microsoft 365 Business. So as we take a look in here, let's take a look at some of the things that have changed since we went out with the first round of Microsoft 365 Business training towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year. So the first one that I'll start off with is support for hybrid Active Directory deployment. So this is one of the things that was a bit of a showstopper in a lot of the conversations we were having during that first round of training, because effectively the message with the first release of Microsoft 365 Business was really about moving to the cloud and letting go of on-prem technology. And this is something that's probably not going to surprise you, but for a lot of customers and partners, there was a lot of pushback on that message. So the support for hybrid Active Directory deployment means that we can have domain joined PCs on premise that can be registering against Azure Active Directory. We don't need to go through rebuild profiles. We don't need to necessarily go through and figure out how do we try to map, group policy settings into MDM settings, for example. Instead, we can just use it alongside what we've already got. And as you can imagine, that's really a much, much better message to go out with. The second part of the announcement was really focused on a lot of the additional security and protection capabilities. Now in Australia, we've got the notifiable data breach regulation that's come into play at a global level. I think everyone's got some degree of understanding of what GDPR implies. But they really had to start looking at what are some of the additional things that customers really need regardless of size. So some of the inclusions that we start getting here, we get Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, and this provides safe links and safe attachments inside of Exchange Online, inside of SharePoint Online, inside of Teams, and inside of the Office Business desktop applications as well. And so this is something that is normally part of the Microsoft 365 E5 offering, but in this case, it's actually something that's now also in Microsoft 365 Business. We've got Azure Information Protection, so that if we need to start looking at some of the sensitive internal information and saying, well, rather than just controlling where we store it in the organization to limit who has access to it, how about if we actually start putting encryption within the files themselves, and we also start putting permissions within the files. So even if someone gets a hold of a file they shouldn't have, they won't have the ability to go through and open that and do anything with it. So previously, Azure Information Protection was part of the EMS product, but now it's also moved into Microsoft 365 Business. The data loss prevention element was something that previously you would have had to go up to an Office 365 E3 SKU to start getting these capabilities. But again, it's something that now has been, the functionality of Microsoft 365 has been extended to really start, rounding out what are the ways that we can start tracking how data, if data is leaving the organization, how can we, first of all, how can we track that it's leaving, but also how can we actually protect that, and how can we protect users using ATP from some of the types of phishing attacks that we're all starting to see now. So these are things where they're sort of taking a bigger view of it in terms of the overall security and protection story to determine what can they enable. Because what you have to think about here is these aren't new features that are being created for Microsoft 365 Business. This is the Microsoft 365 Business team cherry picking the appropriate technologies out of the higher end, more expensive products and just making them part of that same Microsoft 365 Business SKU, but without changing the price of the Microsoft 365 Business SKU. So you actually end up getting a lot more value today than you did when the product was initially released. Now, the final thing here is for organizations that are looking at how do we do some kind of internal training, how do we get some kind of internal video source, because we don't really want to be publishing our training videos out on YouTube, for example, just because it's easy. We can also start leveraging technologies like Microsoft Stream for that. So let's take a step back and take a look at the bigger picture of what Microsoft 365 Business provides. So what we've got here are the three pillars that we'll work through. So first up, we've got the Office 365 component. So when you think about the Office 365 component that's in here, effectively it's Office 365 Business Premium. So we get Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. We also get the ability to have it on 5 PCs, 5 mobile devices, 5 tablet devices. So we still get all of those underlying benefits that would normally be there with our Office 365 subscription. We get the Exchange Online capabilities, we get Teams, we get SharePoint, we get our OneDrive personal storage up there as well. But we also now start getting technologies like Exchange Online archiving. So so some of the things here is making sure that we can go through, we can use Exchange Online archiving, we can start doing things like mailbox hold, so that if we want to sort of make sure that if someone may not realize that their mailbox has been compromised, or their account has been compromised, we can start using these tools to start locking things down. And then if we do discover that something has happened, we can go through and we've got a better way of being able to track what's been going on inside of the organization. When we start looking at the advanced security elements, one of the ones that I mentioned was we've got the Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection included. We've got multi-factor authentication. Certain Windows Defender scenarios can be very easily enabled through the Microsoft 365 Business Admin Center. So rather than you having to figure out what are the policies that need to be enabled to start putting stronger device security in place, we can start just doing that through a simplified console. We can make sure that BitLocker is enabled quite easily. We'll back the BitLocker key up to Azure Active Directory if needed. So just really thinking about the scenarios where they can go through and start putting in some additional security policies to protect the device, protect the user, and protect the organization's data. So that then sort of also extends out to what we were talking about. So the data leak prevention. So, putting rules in place around data loss prevention, around reporting, around blocking, and then using Azure Information Protection to really start securing the data inside the organization that really is the most sensitive. And generally speaking, when we're looking at Azure Information Protection, we've got a wide variety of file formats that we can protect, but it doesn't mean we have to protect everything. So even though a lot of things may be internal only for an organization, only a small subset of those would really be confidential or incredibly sensitive that would need protection, and then need the additional restrictions around who could actually open those and what they can do with those once they've opened them. And then finally, as we move into device management, really one of the big changes here that's really important is that now it's moved across from to the full capabilities of Intune are now included. With the first release, it was a large portion of Intune's functionality, but not all of Intune's functionality that you were licensed for. So they've removed that restriction just to make sure that you've got more flexibility around how you approach managing mobile devices. So that's really a huge improvement versus what we had. As well as additional capabilities, obviously we've still got things like the enhanced Windows deployment capabilities, doing cloud-based deployments using Windows Autopilot, which allows us to do very simple user-based or user-driven installations just by providing their corporate credentials as they're signing into that brand new device for the first time. So rather than going through and presenting a slide where we've got Microsoft 365 Business compared against 20 different versions of Office 365 and Microsoft 365, which gets a bit overwhelming, what we're finding at the moment is that most of the people that we're talking to about Microsoft 365 are really coming at it with a bit of an understanding of what's in Office 365 Business Premium in most cases. So when we take a look at what we start getting with Microsoft 365 Business, it's the device setup, the device management, some of the advanced security capabilities, additional policies, and that email and documents security. Now, where things get where we start sort of seeing other types of comparisons that people would make here is if they might compare Microsoft 365 Business to a Microsoft 365 E3 or a Microsoft 365 E5, and the reality of the situation here is it's Microsoft 365 Business is a subset of Microsoft 365 Enterprise E5, but it's not really a subset or a superset of Microsoft 365 E3. They both have things that the other one doesn't because of some of the E5 capabilities that have actually rolled down into Microsoft 365 Business. But we find that trying to just sort of provide these simplified SKU options rather than trying to overwhelm with here's all the different things that you need to know. Instead, if there are questions that you've got, obviously ask them in the sidebar and I'll address them towards the end of the session when we start wrapping things up. But what you can see highlighted here are the new capabilities that have been added in. So the Intune capabilities now give you device management for iOS, Android, and Mac OS, not just for Windows. We get that Azure information protection. We get Office 365 DLP, Office 365 ATP, archiving, e-discovery, litigation hold. And these are things that even in small businesses are absolutely critical. So it's finding out what's going on, and also trying to prevent some of these types of things from going on in the future. So when we take a look at how we start positioning Microsoft 365 Business alongside some of the other technologies that are out there, what we're really trying to promote here is the idea of, Microsoft 365 has got a lot of these capabilities, that previously you would have been, going out and putting together a piecemeal solution using different tools from different vendors, different management interfaces, etc., not necessarily integrating very well with each other. What we're trying to do with Microsoft 365 Business is give you an easy entry point into getting a lot of these types of capabilities, but then also giving you that simplified Microsoft 365 admin console, just to keep you sort of going in the right direction. And over time, you'll see enhancements to the dashboard around, as new features get rolled in, as new scenarios light up, they'll be able to keep extending that dashboard so that you don't necessarily have to know all of these components inside out in order to know that you're being protected from them, which is obviously an important thing. So how do we go through and start targeting different types of customers for Microsoft 365 Business? So there's a few different ways that we can approach this. So one of them is we present the value proposition. So if it's a customer who's in the market for an Office 365 subscription, someone who basically wants to have all of these things coming in at that single subscription at that at that sub $30 per user per month price point, that's something that Microsoft 365 Business will deliver for them. For customers who are more interested in the productivity side, again, it's important to understand that we build on a base of Office 365 Business Premium, but then we start adding the additional device management capabilities. We add the additional security capabilities, the data protection capabilities on top of that. So again, a different type of customer that we may have this conversation with. And then for the final one, what we find is that there'll also be certain, compelling events that make the customers more receptive to conversations that they may have put on hold for an extended time period. So one of the examples here is, we've got GDPR, we've got Windows 7 approaching end of support, Office 2010 end of support, Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 are approaching end of support in a year and a half or so. So we can start looking at some of these types of things where we can look at it in terms of more of a proactive approach. Or alternatively, there are some customers that may unfortunately go through may come under attack. They may have discovered that they've been breached. So a lot of the conversation you may have is, well, here is what we'll do when we start deploying these technologies to really make sure that those entry paths that people had in the past aren't going to be aren't going to be that same ease into the network as it may have been with the previous solution that they were leveraging. So as a partner, how do you start looking at Microsoft 365 Business and maybe trying to slot it alongside of some of the traditional offerings you may have made out to your customer base in terms of services, or alternatively, even if you've been already working with Office 365 for a while and you're trying to figure out, well, what are the things we can start doing with customers or for customers with Microsoft 365 Business? Well, if we work through the different stages here, so stage one, starting to just sort of, this would include some of the basics such as file migration into SharePoint or OneDrive for Business, doing the mailbox migration, even some of the low-hanging fruit, so multi-factor authentication. So making sure that organizations can start leveraging some of the more advanced security capabilities, but looking at things that are going to have a minimal impact on end user day-to-day productivity in terms of not putting anything in play that's really going to impact the way that they work. Once we move up to the next level, this is where we really start looking at, well, here's what Microsoft 365 Business provides as some of its core value. So in some cases, it's going to be leveraging that free upgrade from an earlier version of Windows 7 Pro up to Windows 10 Pro. So that way, getting them onto a common platform. Going through, you might offer building out a new SOE for them. You might start figuring out how do we do cloud-based app deployments. It's really a matter of, going out, talking to the customers and finding out, as they start moving from their older operating systems to Windows 10, what are some of the modern management approaches that really start making a lot more sense for them? So how do we, so part of this could be shifting from group policy-based management to MDM, if that's one of the things you're interested in. Or alternatively, it might just be, let's try out a handful of new users and new devices using MDM policies, because these are people who are going to be they might be people who live out on the road. They're not actually connecting into the head office. Group policy settings aren't going to be applied or refreshed. So why not actually start leveraging the cloud management as well as the cloud-based reporting that Intune will provide for us. Now, another important piece here is not just providing that support, but one of the big things that we find when we talk to customers who've deployed Office 365 is, and obviously Microsoft 365 includes Office 365, is making sure that their users are aware of some of the new capabilities that they've received, because otherwise they'll end up with extra things that they don't use. They don't realize there are better tools for their job versus some of the traditional ways they've been doing them. And an important part, for you as partners is sort of making sure that these are also tools that you are familiar with. So obviously with Office 365, a lot of the underlying technologies get fairly regular updates, but even just having a core understanding of how some of these technologies works, and then you passing those skills on to the customers so they can fan internally, definitely helps the customer a great deal. Now, once we get to stage 3, this is where we really start looking at some of the specific capabilities per customer. So rather than just saying, here's just a standard service we offer everyone, once we get up to stage 3, this is where we really need to start looking at, well, what's most important for this customer? So things like advanced threat protection, well, in some cases, if it's an organization that people are clicking on phishing emails all the time, you may have already deployed advanced threat protection to really try to protect them very, very early on in the process. So that's also something where there's going to be a bit of user education involved, because someone sends them a message with an attachment in it. They go to open the attachment, but instead there's a placeholder telling them, we need to scan the attachment before you get the attachment, but would you like to see a preview? So we need to make sure that people understand that there are some under the covers changes. So that's like one of the reasons why ATP is in this third column, where some of you are probably thinking, I'd really be pushing that out in the first column, myself included. Like leveraging some of the additional Windows 10 security capabilities, looking at what other software is going out there, looking at, are there any, does the customer have any concerns around GDPR or notifiable data breach requirements in Australia? So making sure that they're somewhat comfortable. Now, it's not saying that you have to be, a GDPR expert or an NBR expert. It's just having the awareness that you can talk to your customers so that they're aware of what their responsibilities are. So, that's something that's probably going to make, moving to that third stage an easier conversation. And then, again, when we get into the continuing services, we keep going through and, educating the customers, making sure they're aware of what's included that they may not be using, letting them know that, making sure that they're aware of here are some of the new services, but also then you using your knowledge of the customer to determine what makes sense to go back and talk to that customer about. So, if they're not interested in, video capabilities and they've never expressed an interest in video capabilities, you're not going to constantly go out and talk about new stream capabilities to them, for example. Whereas if mobile device management is something that they're really interested in, then that's something that obviously, every month or so when Intune gets new updates, you might have a look through the update feature list and say, this is something that's actually going to be really useful for that customer based on this conversation we had last month. Some of the things that make it easy for you to start having these conversations with customers is Microsoft's really been investing very heavily in putting together different development guides and different partner toolkits so that you can go through and start, rather than having to piece together a lot of the elements together yourself. Instead, they're going through and starting to provide some guidance. So some of the guidance starts off fairly light, how to have a cloud conversation with a customer that you may be doing like an on-prem to cloud, a lift and shift, or just migrating away from an old SBS server to to start leveraging Office 365 and Microsoft 365, all the way through to some of the more advanced security documentation they've produced that specifically targets Microsoft 365 business. So rather than it being something where you're trying to look at all of the different Microsoft documentation sources and determine what's relevant for a Microsoft 365 business customer, instead they're going out and building this documentation for you so you can download the documents, you can download the different toolkits, and you can actually get a really good idea of what they're trying to achieve and how you can roll that into your customer proposals. So the URL, aka MS M365B partners, but we'll make sure that you get a PDF version of the presentation so that all the URLs, etc., will work. So you don't need to frantically write them all down. And you'll also be able to download the video as well in the future. Another tool that Microsoft has made available recently is the Launchpad, and this allows you to go through and start doing some, basically go through and it will sort of give you ideas of what types of things you can build around solutions that you're already delivering, and what you can then go through and start building on top of those. And that one is at aka.ms/partner launchpad. So again, don't stress about the URL. The PDF has been sent through, so you should be able to access that very shortly. Now, one of the programs that Microsoft is currently running is, I think it's so it's running right now. So it's the first partner, or the first, I think it's like the first 100 partners off the top of my head that get to an additional 300 Microsoft 365 business seats. Someone from that organization will get to go to Greece for a scholarship, which is not a word for going out and eating lots of lamb and souvlaki. You'll go there, you'll have members of the product team there, you'll have there'll be sales training opportunities, technical training opportunities there. I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to enjoy the location as well, no doubt. But it's really designed to try to get some of the the top Microsoft 365 business partners together, so that they can sort of share their experiences from around the world to make sure that the community learns from each other. Now, some of the important things that are coming up. We've got the Synnex Cloud Roadshow coming up. So this kicks off in Brisbane on the 2nd of October. It's a 2-day event. Day one is more of the sales, marketing, and business owner day, where there'll be Azure and Microsoft 365 business conversation. And then on day two, it's more of the technical side, where there'll be more technical presentations, hands-on labs, etc., for Azure and Microsoft 365. So obviously for the technical day, it's not necessarily going to be the same people inside the organization. So yeah, so for that, make sure that you go through, you register early, and yeah, I'll definitely give you a teaser that there'll be some new things that we'll be able to talk, that we should be able to talk about once this roadshow hits, that we can't talk about quite yet. So that's probably going to be one of the first places that we'll get a chance to talk about that. So that event is going to be running in Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, Melbourne, then Adelaide. So effectively that takes us over the entire month of Adelaide on a week-by-week basis. Some promos now that are in market. So there's a $100 off Surface promo based on your Microsoft 365 business sales. Now Noreen is currently on the call, so if you've got questions about this one, shoot a message through to Noreen and give her your contact details so that she can chat to you about this. So again, it's making sure that if someone's out there promoting Microsoft 365 business to their customers, that if they're also interested in Microsoft hardware, there'll be some additional things that they can start adding into that. Now, another offer that Synnex have got at the moment as well is some one-on-one Microsoft 365 business sessions. So you'll be able to go through and have 30-minute sessions from the Synnex team, and effectively a time that suits you and members of your team to jump on the call, ask your questions, to go through some of the different types of scenarios, the different types of questions you may encounter. So go through. The registration link is here. Again, you'll get the PDF soon, so you'll be able to go through and click on the link. And there's also a promotion for the first 50 partners to register. They'll get 4 movie tickets per organization. So you can take you and 3 friends that you work with. So hopefully these are some good incentives to help you. Again, here in Noreen's email address details so that you can contact her if you do, if you're interested in this, or how to redeem the tickets. So what we'll do now is spend a few minutes, or we've got a bit of time now to really jump in and go through some of those questions that are in here. So far I'm not seeing any questions. I'm seeing comments about people who can see video, people who can hear, and vice versa. So what I'll do now is switch over so that any questions that you've got, we can jump into those. If any of them are ones that I can't give you a good answer on today, I might have to sort of ask that question again in October, so that I don't get myself into too much trouble breaking NDA. So we've got SW typing a message. Okay, so the MFA offering that's included is for people to go through, and there's 2 different ways that we'll be able to use the MFA capabilities that are in here at this point in time. The first one is if we if we want to go through and start doing password, if we're not doing on-prem identity, if we're just doing cloud-only identity, then we're really using MFA in that case as one of the easier ways to allow users to perform self-service password resets, because that them being able to reply through through a token, through an authenticator app, through an SMS code, whatever method it is that the organization has deployed, we can start using multi-factor authentication from Azure Active Directory to handle that for us. Now, the other place where the MFA comes into play is when, like with Microsoft 365 Business, where there's something that the system has, where you're attempting to log in and something just really doesn't seem right with that login, and instead of just letting you in, going, well, you know the username and password, so I'll let you in. Instead, it's got the ability to go through and challenge you with multi-factor authentication just to make sure that you are who you say you are before it allows you into the environment. So hopefully you don't really hit that second scenario very often. Otherwise, there'd probably be some questions around what networks are you coming from, what's going on your device, what's it, is it part of a botnet, for example? But so generally, it's going to be around that self-service password reset capability. So any other questions? So no problem, SW. Yep, so this one, like we deliberately kept the technical details lighter in this one. So if you sort of want to sort of jump into more of that, in the training in October, just to give you an idea of like the focus in there, it's really going to be split into two main areas. It's going to be the hybrid domain joined scenarios, so having devices that are AD joined, but also participating with Azure Active Directory and Intune, so that you're leveraging some of the capabilities of Microsoft 365 Business. And then the second part is really going to be focused on how do you take advantage of the new security tools that were included. Now, obviously, we'll have time to touch upon other topics as needed, because we can't always assume that that's going to be what everyone wants to hear, but they're really going to be the two key things we'll cover. So, any other questions? We've got some more typing coming in. Oh, it must be a long question. I'm getting scared now. It's taking a long time for it to be typed out. Adam, that's a wonderful question. This is something that I actually emailed somebody about yesterday, and I'm waiting on a response. Leave that one with us. Let me answer it in a form that I'm allowed to give. As part of the base Microsoft 365 Business license, there will not be an upgrade from Home to Pro included. I think I've said that correctly, but I can't say anything else. Noreen, is that something you can add to based on anything on your price list yet? I can neither confirm nor deny that there is something else on the horizon. October is a good time to ask some of these potential questions again. Okay, so when you start working with ATP, so Noreen, I'll take it offline, and it's probably a follow-up item we've got for somebody on here. It's one of the actually, I'll take it offline with you, Noreen, and we can get back to Adam on that one. Okay, so just going back to Phil, it's how you go through and start configuring it. So with Advanced Threat Protection, sorry, I've got to be careful here. With Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, you've got multiple, you've got some elements through the UI where you can do configuration of how you want it to go through and basically deal with these. You can also do some additional elements around automation with PowerShell as to how you want it to go through and start treating those. So you've got so with that one, when it's seeing things like the spoof domains, etc., it's something that it's effectively what it would be doing in that case is it's capturing that information as part of the URL rewrite that it's going to be doing for the safe attachments or the safe links. So if it's seeing something that it knows isn't quite right, then more than likely what you'll find is that you won't see that URL. It's not a URL that user would ever actually be exposed to. Instead, when the user is clicking on the link that Safe Links or Safe Attachments provides instead, it'll go back out to the Safe Links or the Safe Links or Safe Attachments service. It will query that URL to see what basically what its safety rating is, and if it still thinks that it's a spoofed URL, then it's not something it's going to allow the user to actually continue on to. So if it's if it's someone with regular user privileges, they're not going to be able to click through. But it might be a case where like an admin may decide they actually want to click through to see what's actually there, even though we strongly discourage that. But generally, you'll find that it's just something that effectively, if you tried to click on that link that Safe Links went through and did a rewrite of, it's always just going to get redirected back through to the Microsoft service, where it's going to say this is an unsafe link. We won't let you continue. Okay, so I think Phil's just typing in a follow-up. So for that, you jump into the Security and Compliance Center. So if you're sort of doing a lot of it from the one-off side, you'd be doing it under like the ATP section in Security and Compliance Center. But if you end up needing to do it across quite a few different client sites, it's probably worth looking at some of the PowerShell scripts around using Office 365 ATP, so that you could basically just apply the same settings across multiple tenants without having to constantly jump in and out of dashboards and follow following steps. I'd say look at how much of it you could actually automate. Oh, okay. So so in some cases what happens there is when you've got multiple services that are doing similar kinds of things in terms of that URL inspection and rewrites, a lot of them will start flagging each other. So you'd have to sort of go through and then start. Like, I haven't looked at any of the documentation around what happens when it's basically being filtered twice before it gets to the user. But there might be an option to effectively whitelist that other site as a trusted location, but I haven't looked at that. Yeah, and the reason why I know that one is I've seen things that I've sent to people that or that come to me have gone through that's gone through someone else's scanning solution, then it's come through Safe Links on my side, and then when I reply to them and they reply back, you start looking at the URLs that have been replaced, and it becomes a little bit of a mess because they're all being very protective. Okay, well, if there are any more questions, I'll stay online for a bit longer, but otherwise, unless, I'm not sure if Noreen's got anything she wants to add in quickly. I can give you the floor, Noreen, if you want to talk to everyone. She's probably thinking, no, that's okay. Yes, okay, here we go. I'll just unmute Noreen. They're all yours.
Thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, actually, no, I think it's all good. I don't have anything else to add at this stage. I just wanted to remind everyone that we've got the Cloud Roadshows next month. So please, if you haven't registered already, you let me know if you need me to send you the EDM invite. I think Mark has already shared the registration links. So we're looking forward to seeing you all there. Also, I wanted to remind you that we're still running the one-on-one sessions via Skype. Microsoft 365 Business one-on-one sessions are all run by our pre-sales team. So please feel free to, we really encourage you to register for these one-on-one sessions, give you more an overview and, a value prop of the product and how to pitch it and everything. And also I wanted to remind you that the first 50 partners who would register to attend these one-on-one sessions will get movie tickets. So that's, that's exciting. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the CSP team. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Maureen. So thank you, everyone. So I'll keep this session open for like the next 15 minutes or so. If you do think of something and you want to jump back on, I'll go back and I'll mute Maureen again in case she forgets that she's not
Thank you very
muted.
much, Mark.
Okay, and I'll mute myself. But otherwise, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll make the recording and the presentation available shortly.